My hopeful this evening is that I'm going to reinforce a lot of things you already know, but I'm also hopeful that you'll walk away with a nugget or two that'll elevate your trout game to the next level. I can honestly tell you that for me, fly fishing, the most rewarding part about fly fishing is that it's a continuous learning endeavor for all abilities. Whether you're brand new to the sport or you've been doing it for 30 years, you can always learn something. So I enjoy fishing with guides all over the world, and I learn something every single time I go out. I've learned more by not catching fish in comparison to catching fish. So I'm going to talk about some of my failures tonight because those have helped me become a better angler. I got to find my remote. That's going to be the next thing. So I was born and raised from Colorado, and I caught my first fish in the Gunnison Valley when I was 10 years old. I was blessed to have a father that took me underneath his wing at a very early age, and he taught me how to catch my first trout. He gave me the gift of the outdoors. He taught me to be a steward of the environment. He also turned me on to my uncle, who taught me how to tie my first fly shortly thereafter. My dad and my uncle had no idea where his passion was going. Let's just say it started burning out of control. I remember my father saying, son, if you put as much effort into your schoolwork as you do your fly fishing, you would be a straight A student. Both my mom and dad were teachers, so I couldn't argue with that. The fact of the matter is it's been a fun ride for me since I was a young man. I can remember my dad telling me that 90% of the trout were caught by 10% of the fishermen. It's a cliche we've all heard many times. The truth of the matter is a large percentage of the fish are caught by a small percentage of the fishermen. It's very, very true. In our business, knowledge does lead to success. So we toss luck right out of the equation. Luck is not part of fly fishing. Luck is marrying your wife in a drift boat on the Gunnison River. That's luck. But a brown trout like this is not luck. So the more that you know about the fish, the more that you know about the river, the more that you know about the techniques to catch those fish, the better angler you eventually become. It's very simple. It's blocking and tackling. And we as anglers have a tendency to outthink ourselves in a lot of situations. So this evening, we're going to break it down and analyze some of the nuances that will hopefully help you elevate your game to the next level. As I mentioned, I've had the opportunity to fish with guides all over the world. One of the great ones that I've fished with is Steve Henderson. I fished with guides in South America. I fished with guides in Alaska. I fished with guides in Brazil. And I always walk away with some sort of valuable lesson. I'm not a numbers guy per se, but when you bring a fish to him, like this beautiful Williams Fork fish, it punctuates that you are doing things right, that your technique is sharp, and that you're in the game. So I'm going to talk about matching the hatch. All my talks, I like to talk a little bit entomology because it's one of the most intimidating parts of our sport. And again, I think us as fly anglers, we have a tendency to outthink ourselves. But let's talk a little bit about the way fish feed. If you don't have a saying in your vest or your pack, it's one of the most important information gathering tools that you can carry as a fly fisher is a seine. And a throat pump is another good one. The seine allows you to scoop a broad spectrum of what is in the river. And of course, the size, the shape, and the color formula helps you dial that down even further. And behavior is also an important part in matching the hatch. The fish can feed one of two ways. They can feed opportunistically, where they'll eat food organisms day or night. There's no real reason that they're eating those. It's typically during a non-hatch period. It's typically days like you see right here that are bluebird days. There was a bluebird day in Cheeseman Canyon. There was a few midges coming off, not a lot really to speak of as far as dry fly activity was concerned. So this opportunity when fish are feeding opportunistically is to throw some big beefy dry flies. There's searching patterns. It opens up opportunities to throw some of your favorites like your humpies, your royal wolves, your renegades, limeades, and so on and so forth. It also is a good time to employ dry and dropper rigs, again, with a searching tactic looking for that opportunistic grab. Fish can also feed selectively. This can be the most difficult part of our sport is when these fish key in on one particular food organism, which requires us as anglers to fish exact limitations. If you look, this is a day that Kim and I were floating down in the Bighorn. We came down the snag hole and I looked across the surface of the water and I could see midges as far as my eye could see. If you look closely, you can just see midges, midges, midges. There's midges crawling on this fish. And look in the background here, there are midges everywhere. This is a midge cluster imitation that this brown trout was fooled on right there. So it was a really, really incredible day of fishing, but it did require us to have exact imitations. And now we're starting to get into the Baetis time of year. This was a fish that was in Cheeseman Canyon. Now, if you use a throat pump, I don't use it very often, but I used this to demonstrate how selective fish can be. Time of day, time of year. I already knew that fish was eating on Baetis because I was watching the fish feed. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I watched his behavior. It told me that he was keying on Baetis. I could tell that, but the throat pump was the proof of that. So in a situation like that, one of my favorite flies is that stout cup Baetis. You can see the natural bug here on the right, and you can see the stout cup Baetis. And for many of you that have fished with me, and there's a lot of you in this room, you know how good that pattern is. It's a very, very good pattern. Let's talk a little bit about midges. So we're going to do a quick crash course on entomology. If you fish in Colorado, you need to have a lot of midges, particularly on our tailwater fisheries. They're going to represent about 50% of the trout's diet day in and day out. Particularly during the winter months, they're going to be the bulk of the trout's diet. Seen away from 3 to 5 breeds of midges per calendar year. So us as fly anglers, us as fly tyers, we need to familiarize ourselves with the 3 stages of development, which is the larva, the pupa, and the adult. And we need to come to the river prepared to imitate those various stages of their life cycle on a nonstop basis. What midges lack in size, they make up in numbers. When I showed my guests for the day, I said, see all that brown stuff along the river's edge? I said, those are all mid shucks. It looked like dirt. There was so many mid shucks. I could pick them up and scoop them like I was in a sandbox. That's how many midges have been coming off lately in Cheeseman Canyon. Very, very important to understand. So a good healthy trout stream has anywhere between 700 and 2,000 midge larvae per square meter. It's a lot. So your larvae are going to be pale olive and kind of a pale olive, red, or cream color. Typically, with our larvae, as you see pictured here, you can see that their sizes are slightly bigger than the pupa. In fact, as they progress through their development, they get one size smaller through the progression of their development. Now, when we're fishing larvae, we want to dredge those near the substrate where their greatest concentrations are found. So we're going to bounce those right along the bottom. Once a hatch becomes evident, in other words, we start to see those bugs buzzing around, then it's time to think in terms of pupa. More importantly, fishing mid-column. Pupa tend to be shades of brown and black. And you can see here some of my favorites, the top secret midge. This was the breadwinner, though, today in the canyon for me, was the mercury midge. Or the Caven's jujube midge, and then the black booty. Those are just a couple of my signature patterns that have worked well for me over the years. Most important part during the height of a hatch is making sure that you're fishing mid-column and you're not fishing below the fish. That's the number one mistake that most anglers make is they fish below the fish during the height of a hatch. Does that make sense? And then for the adults, some of my favorites, this is a Matt's midge. This is a great bug here. We got the parachute Adams. We got the magic projector here. And a Griffith gnat works very well for areas like the San Juan, the Bighorn, where you actually have clusters. Yeah, that's a high vis. It's for guys like me that can't see anymore. So it works really, really well. Mayflies, they're the heart and soul of fly fishing. When you think about it, we have mayfly on our rig a lot of the time. And so for mayflies, they live their life is about 1 year, 1 calendar year. So about 364 days of their life is spent in that nymph stage. Then they are a dun, and they're not sexually mature in the dun stage of their life. Then they fly away and they turn into a spinner. The one thing that's not labeled as part of the life cycle is the emerger. It's neither a dun, it's neither a nymph, but it's the most important part of that life cycle is that emergence. Very, very important for us as nymph fishermen. Some of my favorites, stuff that you can't live without, Charlie Crobin's Juju Betas. That's a great pattern. If you're a minimalist, I'm not a minimalist, but if you were a minimalist, you could carry a pheasant tail, a ear, and a parachute Adams, and you could catch fish in a mayfly hatch anywhere in the world. So very, very important to understand that in a wide range of sizes, very, very effective. We talked about the importance of Shane style cups. This sparkle wing RS2. I pulled that out of more Cheeseman Canyon fish than anything that I carry in my box. That's one that you want to definitely have. This is a great one here. This is John Taverner's foam wing emerger. This little tuft of foam allows that fly to wiggle and swim like an emerging beta. So when it swims just like an emerging beta. So that's what makes that fly so deadly. Talked about the parachute Adams. Sparkle Dun is my go-to favorite for the height of a mayfly hatch. And then Shane Style Cup CDC Biot Compare Dun is another one of my favorites. We're pretty blessed here in Colorado. We have some really good caddis hatches. We've got that famed Mother's Day caddis hatch, and we also have some really good caddis hatches on our tailwaters. It's important to note in our tailwaters that many of those hatches are going to be delayed well into the summer months because of the ice cold water. Now, if the reservoir fills and spills and we get that warm water coming over the top, water gets warm, caddis come off. So that's very, very important to understand. So water temperature is very, very key with regard to caddis hatches. Now, for the caddis larva, there's 3 different types of larvae that we should familiarize ourselves with. We have Brachiocentrus, which constitutes the Mother's Day caddis hatch. We have the net spinner, which is the hydropsyche. And then we also have the free-living caddis right there. So the biggest difference in their behavior and appearance occurs within the larva. Very, very important to understand that. The pupa look very similar, and so do the adults. The adults look like little moths. They can live for days, even a couple of weeks, because they can intake. So the adults are very, very important, particularly when they come back and oviposit their eggs. Some of my favorites, electric caddis up on the top. This pattern right here, size 18 buckskin must have in the state of Colorado. You cannot live without that pattern, whether you're fishing a freestone or a tailwater. You need to have that one. This is a hydropsyche, a great bug there. This is a pattern that was born in the Pocono Mountains. It's the pattern that I still tie commercially because we cannot keep them in the bins at the shop. I tie them, as fast as I tie them, they're gone. Sparkle pupa, the man that literally wrote the book on caddisflies, Gary LaFontaine. It's an oldie, but a goodie. This is a pattern I designed for the Brachiocentrus. We got the elk hair caddis, caddis, and the Goddard caddis. So I'm very traditional with my advance. Typically start out by dead drifting them. If I'm not enjoying success with that, then I'll typically skate them. Very, very effective method. Stoneflies, they're easiest of all aquatic insects to imitate because they're available to the trout in only 2 stages of their life. Prehistoric looking nymph, and then the egg fluttering adult. Emergence occurs on land. So it occurs on a bridge embutment, it occurs on a rock, and occurs on a log. But it's the migratory phase, what's very important of this hatch. Even now with the winter stones, if you've got winter snows crawling around the snow and ice, you have stoneflies moving towards the river's edge. When you have the salmon flies coming off in June, those stoneflies are moving towards the river's edge. So you, as a fly fisher, should be nymphing with stoneflies close to the river's edge. 4 different varieties of these stoneflies. We've got the winter stone, we got the yellow Sally, we got the golden stone, and we've got the pteronarcis. The 2 latter live 3 and 4 years. So even after the adults have come off for the year, there's still plenty of stoneflies in the river. That's why you can live a size Pat's River Lake in the middle of winter, because there's still plenty of stoneflies in our streams. Let's take a look at some of my favorites. The yellow Sally up there on the top, that's Oliver Edwards pattern. Get that over at the Orvis store. Greg Garcia's Many Hot's a good one. Tungstone, John Barr's pattern. The sweet spot on all your golden stoneflies is going to be about a size 10. You got the woven stuff. You got Rick Takahashi's pattern. Jack Dennis, my mentor growing up, his Amy's Aunt is my favorite golden stone fly. That's rubber leg in a variety of sizes and colors is absolutely deadly. This is a pattern here called Paper Tiger. It's a pattern I invented about 30 years ago. It's about 15 minutes to 20 minutes to tie it. So when you lose one of those, you turn the gear away, you crunch. And then Park's stonefly is one of my favorites for the salmon fly adult. Now we just talked about these little buggers. It's interesting. That stonefly is dark, black. Mother Nature was quite kind to that little guy because he's crawling around on snow and ice the coldest time of the year so that it can intake heat. When you see those crawling around in snow and ice, it's a great opportunity to fish with a pheasant tail right close to the river's edge. And I cannot tell you how many fish I have fooled on a winter stone. We were catching fish on winter stones last week in North Carolina. They were coming off like crazy. Three other food organisms that we should concern ourselves with. Scuds. I love the scuds bite. In June. Scuds in orange, tan, and olive in sizes 12 through 18. Nothing fancy about scuds. They start as small scuds and they end up as big scuds. Nuclear egg is one of my favorites. So a lot of egg midge combos in the shoulder seasons. If you fish the Taylor, you fish the blue in the frying pan, you're going to want to have some mysis patterns. This is one of my favorite Laney's mysis. Leeches, so much buzz on leeches anymore. One of my favorites is just that pine squirrel leech that was invented up on the North Platte River. Great fly. And chamois leeches and aquatic worms. Typically fish the chamois leech in dirty water, red worms in dirty water, pink worms in dirty water, horn brown in clear water. Mars crane fly, out of sight, out of mind mentality there. Don't overlook crane flies. Very, very important. We've got beetles, hoppers, ants, terrestrials provide more bang for the buck. And then you're running with, you're matching the hatch with your attractors is one of the things that I've always enjoyed, and I did growing up with my father. So the most important thing is to make sure that you show up to the river with a thorough selection of nymph. I've never met fly angler, even Pulaski, that had too many flies. Tie 6, tie 12, don't tie one, don't buy two. So you have a thorough selection, dry flies, and also a thorough selection of streamers. Stack the odds in your favor by coming to the river prepared. Talk a little bit about nymph fishing now. It's a proven fact that 90% of a trout's diet occurs below the surface of the water. So it makes complete sense that we will be most successful if we nymph fish. Now, it's not the most fun way to catch fish, but we don't want to catch our fish on dry flies, right? It's the most appealing way for all of us, but it's the most productive method to catch fish day in and day out. So let's talk about a conventional rig. I start out with a 7.5-foot tapered leader. Down on the junction point of my leader, I tie on a piece of additional tippet. That is going to prolong the length of my leader. I can repair that leader for pennies on the dollars in comparison to putting on a new leader. And then I typically fish with some sort of a tandem. Now, it varies depending upon what state you're in. If you go to Montana, you can only fish with 2 flies. In Colorado, you can fish with 3 flies. Mexico, you can fish with 2 flies. So it's important that you understand the regulations. Otherwise, you might have a nice little visit with game and fish, and that might not be so pleasant. So make sure you understand that. Well, let's talk about the knots. I get asked this all the time. People go, do you use a clinch knot or do you use an improved clinch knot? So that's a good question, right? The answer is I use a clinch knot. The reason is that if you tie an improved clinch knot perfect, it's 2% stronger than a clinch knot. But the fact of the matter is most people don't tie that knot properly. So you can see a clinch knot, basically has 5 or 6 turns here, comes through the eye, and then all of those just cinch down. But with the improved clinch knot, oftentimes when you're coming back through here like this, one of these will cross over one another, causing that knot to fail. Better to have a well-tied clinch knot instead of a poorly tied and full clinch knot. Very, very important. So let's talk about tandem rigs. Two different schools of thought with regard to tandem rigs. You can come off the bend of the hook, or you can come out of the eye of the hook. 25 years ago, I used to come eye to eye. But getting two size 24s, 3 tippets, 6X tippets through a 24 is not as easy as it once was. So I'm a big fan of coming off the bend. So typically, whatever rig I'm fishing with, in Colorado, I'm using a 3-fly rig. So what I do is this becomes my attractor nymph. That helps separate my two trailers from the crowd. This varies depending upon the season. If it's May, I might use a scud. If it's June, I might use a stonefly. If it's July, I might use a hare's ear to imitate green drakes. Do you see where I'm going with this? This here is going to try to match the prevailing hatches on the river at any given time, but it's also trying to draw attention to these two lower flies. Your biggest fly should be in this position, your medium-sized fly should be here, and your smallest fly should be there. Your emergers and the pupa should be here, and your nymphs should be here. Does that make sense? So it's very important on how you set up that tandem rig. Now, I'm a huge fan of using a number 6 split shot and then putting soft weight over it to adjust my weight. If you're out fishing and you got 3 BBs on and you take one off, you just made a 33% weight reduction. It's too much. The beautiful thing is you put a number 6 on and take JP's nymphing mud and you just add a little bit of that tungsten putty, you can micromanage your weight so that you are set every single hole. I'm going to blow you away with this. I change my weight and I change my indicator 10 times more often than I change flies. Very, very important to understand that. If you're not catching a fish, first thing you should do is add weight. If you're not catching a fish, move your indicator up a little bit. You'll be surprised how many times you add weight and bam, you're right into a fish. So don't outthink yourself. I asked my guy today, what was the walkaways from our guide trip? He said, don't fish the deep, slow pools and don't change your flies all the time when you're not catching fish. And those were the two things that I preach all the time. Very, very important not to outthink yourself. The yarn strike indicator is probably the biggest tip that I can give you. Now, I know bobber type indicators, I know like Aura and so on and so forth, very popular, but you will catch more fish if you use yarn. I guarantee it. So this is a nice piece of yarn. This is the Pueblo tailwater. You can see the yarn down there. Particularly in this type of water, slow moving water, you will catch more fish with yarn. So how do you make yarn? Well, very simple. You get yourself a forceps, you take an orthodontic rubber band, you wrap it around it 4 to 6 times. You take that rubber band and you simply slide it down onto the leader. You make that loop, you take a little bit of polypropylene, you put it inside there and you cinch that down. Very simple. It's easy to move. So with this conjunction, this indicator, very simple to move it. Keep it 1.5 to 2 times the depth of the current. Constantly adjust your weight. Then the rest is on you because you have to focus on that indicator. This piece of yarn now, that's the fishing for you. That's the beautiful thing about this. If you can cast it out there and you can mend it and keep it loose, you put slack into the system, the indicator fishes for you. It's very, very simple. Now, the important thing is, though, you have to trust your indicator. When you're at a stoplight and you're running through, and here comes somebody and they're going to run a red light, you brake. You don't sit there and go, should I brake? Bam, you don't think I should just try to run it. Sergeant Hook might not appreciate that. The fact of the matter is, when the indicator moves, you set the hook. There's no questions. There's no locks. There's no sticks. There's no logs. You must set the hook. When I take 2 anglers out on the river, it's the guy or the gal that reads the indicator the best that catches the most fish. It happens like that all the time. You see the indicator move. Again, the most important thing here is slack. Slack is your friend. When the indicator moves, you set the hook. Now, believe it or not, there's a wrong and a right way to set the hook. The important thing when you set the hook is it should be a firm stroke, from hard, but it's a short range of motion. Does that make sense? So you're going to set it up or back into the jaw, but you're only going to move the rod 18 inches. Very, very important. If you set uphill, you're going to pull that fly right out of their mouth. And that is where it becomes difficult when you're at the end of the drift and you have to set the hook. So work hard on short range of motion, firm stroke, setting back downhill into the trout's jaw. And then when you do everything right, you bring that fish to hand. It's a darn good feeling. There's nothing worse than going out to the river and not catching fish. But it feels pretty darn good when you go out to the river and catch a few fish. You feel really good about yourself when you go out and catch some fish. Now, the yarn originated on the San Juan River down in northern New Mexico. And I know the club goes there a lot. Those guides down in northern New Mexico have slow water nymphing dialed in better than anybody. So we borrowed it from those guides. We brought that back in the early 90s, Dan Wright and I, and we started fishing with yarn. People were laughing at us. Dorsey's out there fishing with a glazed donut, and I heard all these people, but what? It works. And I can tell you, bottom line is it works. And I've learned a lot from this professional guide right here, Aaron Carruthers. He owns Anasazi Angler. He's been very, very instrumental. Let's talk about betas. Well, we talked about the size, we had talked about the shape, we talked about the color. They're very important parts of matching the hatch. But the thing that we didn't discuss was behavior. We saw that picture of all those betas in that palm of a hand, right? And so I said what I was watching is I was watching this rainbow sitting on a mid. He was chasing that back, grabbing it and coming back into place. Chasing it. I knew that fish was targeting swimming betas. Time of day, time of year, told me that. We knew, and then we pumped that fish and it was full of beta. Now, the important thing is red drifting is important, but it's not always the solution to success. So John Tavener came up with that foaming emerger. So when it tightens in the current and it lifts, because of that wing, it wobbles. And it wobbles to the surface, and it looks like a swimming batis. How many times have you got ready to cast and you got a fish on? You hope your buddy doesn't see it because it's embarrassing. But the fact of the matter is the reason that fish ate that was because it wobbles. Very, very important. I learned that on the San Juan. I was dead drifting through there, and I wasn't catching fish, but the fish were keen on that swimming beta. So that uplifting is very, very important. Next thing is sight fishing. It's an acquired skill, but it takes a lot of practice. You have to keep your flies in front of fish. And furthermore, you have to keep your flies in front of feeding fish. So if you see a fish that's nailed down to the bottom like this, don't even bother. That fish is not eating. But if you see a fish that's suspended like this, now we're in business. Now we have an opportunity. So you're going to walk through a lot of fish, find that feeding fish. Very, very important. Again, maximize your fishing time by looking for those feeding fish, those fish that are up in the transitional zones. Again, fish like that, that's not an accident. That's when everything comes together. You're at the right place at the right time with the right bug, making the proper drift. I'm going to talk about game fish. You probably don't think about game fish, but they really are unique in many, many ways. Brown trout are different than rainbows. And so it's very important to have sort of understanding of the differences between these game fish to be successful. Rainbow trout are spring spawners. Rainbow trout are riffle fish. Rainbow trout are angler-friendly fish. They're tailwater trout because their water preferences, they thrive in 42 to 52 degree water. So they're very, very angler friendly. They like to eat small bugs. They'll rise to dry flies. They eat a lot of small stuff when they're smaller, but as they get bigger, then their diet will change. Think about how many midges it takes to equal one sculpin, one bait fish. So they become much more efficient, and so does your targeting them has to change as well. Brown trout, on the other hand, brown trout, cold water. You catch a fish at Deckers right now, they're going to be like a skinny rail. You go to the Cheeseman Canyon, you catch a brown trout, they're going to be skinny. They hate cold water. They thrive in water temperatures between 52 and 62 degrees. They're fall spawners. The interesting thing, though, is about the time when the rainbow trout are getting to the where they're not quite as happy, rainbow trout, brown trout start to get real happy. So as soon as Cheeseman Reservoir starts to fill and spill, we're at full pool, then all of a sudden the brown trout are everywhere. You just wonder where they were because you're not seeing them right now. We never touched a single brown trout today in Cheeseman Canyon, not one. When you go down to Deckers, it's 76% brown trout. They're a lot harder to catch too. Difficult, but they tend to be very forgiving as small fish. They're small fly eaters. They're also very crafty, and when they get bigger, then you're going to have to employ a pretty good streamer game. That's beautiful brown trout that my buddy Robbie Jardine caught down in Argentina on a streamer. Cutthroats, they share very many similarities with the rainbows as far as the water type, the habitat, the temperature preference. But as they get bigger, they also need and have that desire to attack things, particularly in the spring. This is a brook trout that I caught just a few days ago with my son Forrest in North Carolina. He's he's a part owner now in a fly shop down there. And we went blue line fishing. I'm not sure you've ever had the opportunity to go blue line fishing, but it's the small streams, tight brush. Anyways, Forrest goes, man, they're just not looking up today, Dad. I don't know what's going on. I said, the water seems awful cold. The water temperature was 43 degrees. So the fish weren't looking up. So trout don't like cold water either. And then a couple hours later, we started catching some really, really nice brook trout. And as I mentioned, that's one there. And then brook trout can get big. If you go down into Argentina, this was caught on a size 14 parachute Adams. Caught fish all over the world with a parachute Adams. But what's interesting, and Megan Scott and Mark know this, you go to Argentina, those guys are going to take you to Browntown. They're going to take you to Rainbow Ranch because they like different areas to live in. They require different places, different temperatures, and so on. So think about that. Let's talk about finding the trout. Obviously, the winter is the most challenging fishing. If you're going to catch fish consistently in the winter, then you're going to be a much better fisherman. You're going to be targeting the slower, softer margins. Best fishing is going to be between 11 o'clock and 3 o'clock, predominantly midging fish. The good news about winter fishing is you can generally find a few cooperative fish on almost any winter outing. This is an exciting time of year right now because I took a water temperature this morning. It was 38. I took another one when I left at 42. We're right on the cusp of beta hatches. Another degree or two, we'll start to see blue wings, which is a sure sign that spring has occurred. The fish now are going to move out of these slower tail outs and they're going to move back into the riffle. So this is a really exciting time of year. I've got a meat thermometer. It's $12 on Amazon. It's called a Therm Pro. Everybody should get one of those. I saw my neighbor Craig Davis. It's like cooking his pork chops one night, and I'm like, I'm gonna see that, and I ordered two of them. I tell you what, it's a digital thermometer at $12. I use it every single day. Therm Pro, it's red, $12. Inflation, who knows what it costs these days. When they start moving, you start to see that 42, 44, they'll move up into the riffles, an exciting time of year. This is when the nymph fishing really starts to pick up. We start to see like places like the Bighorn, you have exceptionally good beta hatches. Fishing those mid-channel shelves, those transitional zones, you start to actually feel like you know what you're doing again. We've been struggling all winter long. Now we're actually consistently catching fish. But elevation can make a big difference too. So you get up in places like the tailwater on the Taylor, Winter can go clear till middle part of May. High water season, my favorite time of year is the high water season. You fish bigger bugs, bigger tippet. Your hook up to landing ratio is so much better. It's a special time of year, even on places like the mighty Gunnison right here. You know, my wife's got a life vest on. You can see here the Gunnison's 3,500 CFS. It's clear out of its banks. It's running muddy. Fishing can still be good if you use the right stuff. So think about it. It's another way to have solitude. You got to use your head though. Late June, that's when things really start to shape up for the dry fly anglers, particularly the green drake hatch. One of my favorites. The fish now are feeding their bellies, filling their bellies multiple times daily. We're moving up into those fast riffles. And when I guide during the summer, I'm targeting these upper thirds of those riffles, looking for those actively feeding fish in that faster water. Then as we start to get into the fall season, one of my favorite times of year, this is prime time, particularly on our tail races, because downstream demand becomes much less. Agricultural use becomes less. So these waterways are going to be a lot more consistent. The dry fly fishing is a lot better that time of year. It's a special time of year. You get a dusting up on the mountains. You got the migratory brown trout. Super, super beautiful time of year. You have the hunt for some of those migratory fish. Now we're going to talk about dry fly fishing. So this is a cool picture. This is going to be the spread in next month's Fly Fisherman magazine. I wrote an article on Tarryall Creek, and I think there's some people in here that are aware of Collard Ranch. You guys aware of that? I wrote an article on that. Ross Purnell, he came to me and he goes, Pat, this is going to be one of the biggest stories you ever wrote. He put so much pressure on me. I had to write this story within 3 weeks during show season. But it's one of the most incredible victories that the state of Colorado has ever had. We lose water. We're not gaining water. So there'll be a full spread on Tarryall Creek and the Collard Ranch. We are getting 5 miles of Tarryall Creek. It's pretty incredible. So dry fly fishing, we all love dry fly fishing. It's incredible, but you can learn so much by watching the fish, by watching the rise form. They will tell you that they're feeding on. So if you see the classic head, the tail rise, probably taking mayflies. They're eating something on the surface. We've all seen it, just the sip. It's one of the most graceful things in fly fishing. On the other hand, if we see just the back, we need to assume that those are taking an emerger of some sort. They're feeding below the surface. Ask Mr. Pulatsky about a quiggly cripple and how effective that is, where you fish imitations that are displaying part of the life cycle on the top and part of the life cycle below, potentially just fishing pupa right below the surface. Now, you've all seen the classic gulper where a fish comes up and eats 4 or 5 at a time. That would be a great indication that they're eating spinners of some sort. So watching the fish, watching their behavior, will help you identify what they're feeding on. And you've all seen very splashy rises. They're eating some sort of a fluttering insect like a caddis or potentially a yellow Sally. So pay close attention to the rise form. Now, this is important too. Is looking at the way that a fish rises. Where you see the fish rise is not where that fish is sitting. Very, very important to understand it. The fish is here, and look at how that current pushes that fish back to here where he eats the fly. So you have a compound rise, you have a complex rise, but look at the difference in those, but look at where the fish is positioned in relationship to that actual rise form. Another thing that's interesting to look at is the trout's cone of vision. So the further downstream that they get in the water column, the bigger the cone of vision gets, and the closer that they are to the surface, the smaller the cone of vision is. This fish right here is more likely to come up and eat your dry fly, and compared to this fish right here, again, it's an energy debate for those fish, but look at how much more accurate you will need to be when a fish is suspended close to the surface. Typically, for a dry fly angler, we can fish straight upstream, we can fish down and across, we can fish straight downstream. So those are going to be the approaches that we will use. This is a look at Jim Cannon. We're sitting in the Jamboree pool here. We're in the middle of a blueing olive hatch. And as you can tell here, he's standing broadside to the current. So he's fishing straight upstream. Now, those trade-offs and compromises. The beautiful thing, in theory, you're standing in that trout's blind spot. You're casting to a fish up in here. The biggest challenge here, of course, is not lining the fish. In other words, not landing your fly line with a crummy cast on the fish and spooking the fish. The beautiful thing is that when you set the hook, you're pulling that fly back into the trout's jaw. So false cast, overutilized part of our sport. You see it all the time. You're driving down the road at Deckers, and you see a guy out there doing this, right? You can't catch fish in the air. You have to have your fly on the water. So one false cast, you're going to do a pickup laydown cast. You're going to pick it up. You're going to cast one false cast, put it back down in the water. A false cast is designed to dry the fly, change direction, judge accuracy, and increase line speed. Those are the four uses of false cast. It's not to look good from the road. It's not important. So basically, you're going to judge your axe where you're going to put that down. Very, very effective downstream set. But given the choice, if I can, I will take a downstream set every single downstream cast every single time, because first thing that the fish sees is the fly. He doesn't see the leader. He doesn't see the tippet. He doesn't see the fly line. It's the most deadly tactic as a dry fly angler is to cast the fly downstream. Now, of course, grab covered clothing is very important in a situation like that. This is Terrell Creek. We got some fish that are working over here on tricos. So you need to be able to cast downstream. You need a little bit of slack. And then the most important thing is not to set the hook until the fish needs to come up. Eat your fly, drop his head below the surface before you set the hook. They're very important. Up and across, down and across can be very, very effective. Again, another shot on Terrell Creek where I like to incorporate a reach bend. So what you're doing here with a reach bend is you're just casting, you're kicking that fly line over here. So again, the first thing that fish sees is the line. Then slack is your friend across. S casts can be good. S casts can be good downstream. The end result is when you bring fish to hand, the dry fly. It's a pure form of fly fishing. It's the most satisfying to try to fool a very difficult fish on a dry fly. There's nothing more satisfying. There's nothing more rewarding than doing that, particularly on a fly that you have tied. Dry and droppers, when fish become sensitive to conventional indicator rigs, this allows you to fish some very skinny stuff like an Amy's ant, 6 to 12 inches here. You can go 12 to 18 inches, or we can even go 24 and put a micro split shot there. Think about this. Think about the different sink rates that you can have with dry and droppers. You could use a mercury bead. You could use a brass bead. You can use a tungsten bead. You can use 2 tungsten beads like Charlie Craven's 2-bit hooker. There's 5 different sink rates that you can incorporate into a dry and dropper based on the water speed and the water depth. Very, very important to think about that. The grease leader technique works really, really well. You put dry fly floating on here with the exception of this last 12 inches. Put a Mercury Black Beauty on there. It's going to just sink just right below the surface film. You're looking for that back. We talked about that rise form. Looking for that back to come up, and you'll gently set the hook. Double dries. I'm a big fan of the high vis that you just saw. You were fascinated by that purple wing. It's very good, particularly in high glare situations. Situations like this, you cannot see your dry fly in a situation like that. The high vis will save the day. You can use this as a locator fly. You put a size 16 and then put your little teeny fly 2 feet behind it, 18 inches behind it, and it will make a big difference in your dry fly game. Streamers can save the day. They're only going to represent about 10% of your overall fishing time unless you're a die-hard streamer guy or gal. Streamers are important. It's important to be a well-rounded angler. Don't get trapped in a rut. Make sure that you fish dries when you should be fishing dries. You fish streamers when you should be fishing streamers, and fish nips the rest of the time. So this is the Guadalupe River down in Texas. This is a good friend of mine, Chris Johnson, fishing right next to some of these cypress trees. Now, the bait fish live next to the bank. For a bait fish, difference between getting food and becoming food is a very thin line. So they typically don't stray very far from cover. So for you as a fly angler, you need to cast tight to the bank. You got to be methodical. You got to cover the water. You need to put your rod tip down, manage the line from behind your finger. And the most important thing is make sure that you strip set instead of trout set. Guides get a little cranky when you trout set with streamers. You will not have to ask your partner if you got a hit with a streamer. Sometimes you got to check to see if you still have your wallet. They will hit it so hard, they will dang near pull the rod out of your hand. And again, bringing a fish to hand on a streamer is very, very rewarding. We're going to finish up with a few slides on reading the water, and then I'll answer any questions that you might have. But I remember growing up with my pa, and it was almost like David Copperfield doing a magic trick. My dad would say, I know there's a good fish over there. And then he'd go over and catch it. And as a young boy, I had a hard time figuring out, how did dad know there was a good fish over there? And furthermore, how did he go over and catch that fish? But he always did. I learned so much from my dad. There's been chapters and books, there's been magazine articles, there's been all kinds of things. And if you're new to the sport, sometimes fly fishing lingo can be overwhelming. What somebody goes, well, what is pocket water? So sometimes it's over a person's head. The thing about it is we've all started somewhere. We've all learned somewhere. And it's everybody's responsibility in this room is to give back, to share, and help others enjoy the same success that we have. So you've got riffles, you got runs, and you got pulls. These are the classic funny holes that you see in a lot of places. Riffle, run, pull, tail out. Pocket water, that's where you have those big boulders and some of those long riffles and runs. Undercut banks were part of where dirt has been removed underneath that undercut. And then you have back eddies. So you have a counterclockwise or clockwise rotations in the current provide opportunities for fish. Now, it's very important to understand that fish always face into the current, always, unless they're cruising. But the current is not necessarily always upstream. So here's a great example. Here comes the water. Here's fish looking just like this. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. So here's a great example in Cheeseman Canyon, the lower canyon. By the way, Scott, after this, I've got to show you about a new boulder that just came in the last 3 days. And you are not going to be happy about it. So fit a beer. I mean, I looked at it this morning. I go, where did that come from? Well, anyways, it's right up in this neighborhood up in here. So this is the Riffle Run pool tailouts right here. We've got pocket water, which are miniature pools. We got some bank water over here. But this kind of really shows all of that water right here. Hey, Borger, presentation. I'm not sure how many of you have libraries, but I have a very thorough fishing library, and this book here is one of the best ever written. Book on presentation. Good. And in that book, he refers to feeding lies, prime lies, and shelter lies. So here in a feeding lie, that's where the fish move into a riffle or transitional zone. That's where the food outweighs the risk. It's typically a rainbow trout lie. Prime lie is going to offer both food and protection, typically your brown trout like. This right here is the shelter lie. This is the lie that gets everybody in Cheeseman Canyon. They go, oh my gosh, look at all of those fish down in that pool right there. And then my guy today, he said, I've been guilty of that. He goes, I've been trying to catch those fish. I spend an hour and a half trying to catch those fish, and I can't catch those fish. You can't catch those fish because they're not feeding. You've got to get yourself up here or over here. Here's a great example. You've got your color change, very important. This is the transitional zone. So you've got your riffles. If you were to go up here and you were to look back in here, you would fall into that trap. You'd see all those fish that are stacked up in the back of that run that move down in there because you see them all, but again, they're not feeding. A seam, very, very important for us. It's Mother Nature's conveyor belt. So that's where fast water and slow water converge. Very, very important. Sometimes they're on the pockets, as you can see there. Sometimes they're dark water deliveries. Another mistake that the majority of anglers make is they crowd the river. They move in too fast. You want to start back here and you want to make 6 drifts here. And then rather than pulling more fly line out, you take a step in. And then you make 6 more drifts. And then you take another step and you make 6 more drifts. You turn that into a grid and you fish it methodically. Very, very important. And the sweet spot is going to be the dark water delivery right there, because Mr. Bald Eagle, he sits up here And if you sit out there, you're a victim of an overhead threat. So you'll notice that those fish are going to sit in that dark water. Very, very important. Foam is home. Again, methodically work your way across here, but that is obviously the sweet spot right there. Make sure that you cover it methodically. Saltwater nymphing, the most challenging of all. You know, like I said, the guides in the San Juan, they have the fish can count the rips on your black beauty here. You don't have a chance. So it's very, very difficult. You have to, a lot of times, sight fish. You have to have a very, very delicate presentation so you don't spook them. And the strikes are very, very light in situations like that. Water, it's my favorite because water, you target less pressured fish. So I get out there. I love to target the pocket water. And typically what I do, again, methodical, I'll start here, I'll make 6 drifts, and then I'll make 6 drifts here, and then I'll make 6 drifts here. Then I'll stand here, and I'll start working my way across. Then I'll go over here, and I'll work my way back up. So very methodical approach. Biggest mistake that people they stay in the same hole too long. You have to move. You have to work it with a purpose because a lot of times the first cast in any given slot, any given pool, any given transitional is going to be the one that you catch the best fish. Very important to understand that. Brook channel shelves are hot spots in trout streams. Whether you're fishing a big trout stream or a small trout stream, these drop-offs are the place where feeding fish are going to move into. And this is a great example on the Dream Stream. This is a bug factory. You can see the transitional zone here. So these fish can be sitting anywhere in here. And again, being methodical with your approach is going to increase your opportunities. Again, fish like that. This is not an accident. This is everything happening for a reason. Then back eddies can be a great place to find fish feeding dry flies. It can be a place to find fish feeding below the surface. It can be a great place to be 30 minutes after a trico hatch and sunken spinners are still going around in that back eddy and you're still doing very, very well. The zone has changed, but you're fishing a drowned spinner in those areas. What punctuated that one time was when I was watching a piece of driftwood float around in a back eddy. It never left. Just kept going around, going around, and going around. Back eddies now, we have a back eddy here on the Williams Fork. We have rising fish during an olive hatch. So we've got this back eddy here. Now we've got these fish that are facing this way. Again, fishing are not pointing upstream, but they are facing into the current. So in theory, we're fishing from behind that fish. If you were to come over here and come down there, game over. They're gone. Very, very important to approach those fish from the backside. This was what we used to call the blend hole. It's no longer there down at Deckers, unfortunately, from a big washout. It used to be one of the best holes at Deckers. But this is a foam mat that is at Deckers. And you can see this foam mat. And what you'll see here a lot of times is you'll see, you'll see little bumps where that foam just gently rises and you have fish underneath there eating emergers. Perfect place to put that little high vis pattern and drop a little black beauty below it. And you'll get those fish in those emergers. So very, very important. It's like an undercut bank in some ways. So here we are with the undercut bank. This is a great place to fish a streamer. Fish a streamer tight to the bank. Our good friend John Kiefover with a pretty nice brown trout from the Dream Stream. Logs, oh, these can be your friend or these can be snag nightmares. I mean, my recommendation is you throw in there and you get snagged, don't throw in there and get snagged again. But you can sometimes fish streamers under logs. I mean, they can be great. They can be great areas. But again, you just have to, I've caught a lot of nice fish around logs, but you have to kind of use discretion. So it can be a current deflection and some of your bigger stones, particularly your free stones. So it can be a great place during high water. Log jams, a great place to find rising fish. If you really look for them, you can find fish rising on a given day during the summer. This was a PMD hatch. A lot of these fish were sitting in here. Obviously, we're fishing downstream. It would be very difficult to come up behind this and be successful. So casting downstream. Overhanging brush, deadfall, beetles. Start walking through a dense stand of willows. What happens? You're covered in ants. Very important. Ants, beetles, hoppers. as Mr. Terrestrial would say, Mr. Pulaski back there, very, very important part of fly fishing. Can provide a little bit more bang for your buck. This was a fish that was taken up on the Yampa under some overhanging alder. So don't be afraid to fish under those brushes. Islands and back channels, very, very important. On the tip of an island, you're always going to have, my pointer's about had it. Come on, I just need another 5 minutes. So here you have the main channel coming, and then during high water, you've got the back channel here. So you have a drop off. So during the high water season, like this photograph here, I can't get rid of this. This is my youngest boy who's 30 now, but I keep this in the slideshow because this was one of the most magical days we had on the Gunnison River. The river was high, but we were in a back channel and we got into one of the most incredible alley hatches I've ever fished in my entire life. So think about the back channel as being a smaller river during higher flow regimens. There's nothing worse than lots of veg. Again, maximize your fishing time, line droppers. If you're nymph fishing and you're picking crap off your flies every 5 seconds, your downtime is big. So dry and dropper is the most effective method to approach that. And again, I cannot emphasize fishing terrestrials on the downwind side of some of these grassy banks. This is an area that's not getting a lot of foot traffic. Those fish are moving in there and they're eating those terrestrials that fall into the water. I think you guys could probably agree. There's so much to learn about fly fishing, so much to think about fly fishing, so much to share about fly fishing. And I don't think I'll ever learn it all. And like I said earlier, I've learned so much by, my failures, by my messing up a dry fly presentation. That's how I learned the effectiveness of a downstream. The thing about it is just try to remain open-minded, try to remain well-rounded, and just every now and then think outside the box. The most important thing about fly fishing is try to grow, try to push yourself. Don't get trapped in a rut. Don't go to the same hole every single time based on previous success. Try to push yourself, try to get better. The most important thing is to have fun. You have to try really, really, really hard to have a bad day on the river. You should never have a bad day on the river. Every day on the river is a good day. If there's anything that I can do to help you guys prepare for any trip to the river, just don't hesitate to call, reach out to me. But I brought all my books, got the South Platte book, Colorado Guide Flies. If you like those illustrations, most of those illustrations came out of this program, came out of those 2 books. The majority of them are in this. So if you already own my Tailwater book, you have a lot of those illustrations in hand. And my Lids book is Colorado Guide Flies. As I mentioned, here's my contact information. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. If there's anything that I can do, if you enjoy photography, you can follow me on Instagram for the day-to-day updates. But by all means, call me on my cell phone, email me, anything I can do. I just upped my membership to the Cutthroat chapter. It hasn't expired yet, but so this has been my chapter for a long, long time. I'm proud to be a member. There's so many friends in this chapter, and I always appreciate. I'm trying to get to more meetings. I made the first few meetings, but now guide season's starting to kick in, so I won't be around as much. But appreciate the opportunity to share my passion. I've had a great evening tonight. I hope you have as well. Thank you. Anybody have any questions real quick before I show Mr. Scott this huge boulder? Any questions? You know anything? So for me, I think you as an angler should be well-rounded. And I think if you employ Euro tactics, then it's another arrow in your quiver. I personally don't do it. It's not my cup of tea. I'm not good at it, but I'm surrounded by people in our shop that are very good at it. So if somebody wants to do it, I send them to Brian Kelso. He's a master at it. So I would recommend it. It's good. People use drop shot rigs. That's fine. Do whatever it takes. Do whatever you enjoy, and try to. Didn't see you guys sitting over there. You know what I mean? Just try to keep going at it. So there's got to be another question. The canyon is not looking real good right now. It's I think you've been in there. The good news is though the fish look great. I have not run across any fish that I think have been impacted by this event. The problem right now is the loss of habitat. It's huge. So when I'm running my trip from Cattle Crossing up to Hell's Half Acre, about a third of that water is fishable in comparison to the way it was a year ago. So it's making me hike further. I walked 6 miles today and about 14,000 steps on my guide. I can't do that every day. I actually need to because I'm a little got my winter weight I got to get rid of. But so what the question is what do we need? You know, I was at that meeting last week. We need water. We need more of what we had last week. We 85% full of the reservoir. We need 1,000 CFS to come through that canyon, and Denver Water won't give it to us because they can't give it to us. It's illegal for them to give it to us. So we need Mother Nature. We need more of what we had last week, and that's the only thing that's going to save it. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Okay. The question was orange scuds. He's been having a lot of success on orange scuds, and we fish a lot of UV scuds, orange particularly. I catch more fish on orange scuds than I do any other color. Green scuds are obvious olive, the dead ones. Scud is going to work year round. You know, they're a big food organism. They become victims of behavioral drift, so they're moving around a lot, particularly low water or no light situations. So scud's always a great fly and elite fly. I know what Jerry's got to get on with the raffle here, and I gotta drink my cold beer. You know, I mean, any other questions? Okay, sir. No, but the guy that I fished with today does it all the time, but I wouldn't let him do it. I made him indicator fish. He's getting the roaring fork tomorrow, so he's going to do that over there. But no, I don't drop shot because the reason I don't, and I'm not saying it's bad, but I just don't think it gives you the ability to fish mid column like I do. I fish a lot of mid column, a lot of midges, a lot of pupa mid column, and so for me it just works better. And I always tell people that you know Coach Prime runs this offense, Coach Saban runs this offense, but we're trying to score touchdowns. Does that make sense? So do whatever you feel good about. Do whatever works well for you, and that's I think that's the best answer. Any other questions? Awesome. Well, thank you very much. There you go, Jerry.